Good morning, everyone. Hearty wishes for Holi. I hope you all had a colorful one yesterday. We are joined today for the sixth session in our ongoing Fountainhead series. Uh, I'm very happy to say that for today's session, we have architect Rajiv Kathpalia presenting on the topic In Search of Nalanda. Before we start with the session, I request all the attendees to kindly type your questions in the chat box. And should you have any question, and we'll take them after the presentation. Architect Kathpalia needs no introduction. However, for the uninitiated, let me introduce him in a few lines. Architect Rajiv Kathpalia is a partner at Vastu Shilp Consultants, the multidisciplinary practice founded in 1955 by Pritzker laureate Balkrishna Doshi. Architect Kathpalia's work integrates frugal and environmentally responsible strategies to create inclusive habitats for people. Renowned for his institutional designs, he has won several national and international competitions. Designing across a range of scales, architect Kathpalia's practice encompasses regional and city plans, institutional campuses, individual buildings, and even furniture. His net zero approach to campus planning, which integrates architecture, landscape, ecology, energy generation, and management, while creating an equitable and inclusive social milieu, has set new benchmarks for sustainability and innovation. Architect Kathpalia serves as trustee and is a former director of Vastushilp Foundation, a research-based non-profit charitable trust. The organization creates environmental and habitat designs for the poor and has extensively worked in informal settlements to create low-cost housing. He also runs the foundation's International Habitat Studio program, which brings together students from across India and around the globe. He was recognized with the Prime Minister's Award for Innovative Urban Design for his pioneering advocacy and design work on the inner city of Hyderabad within the Charminar precinct. Architect Kathpalia earned his bachelor's degree in architecture from Chandigarh College of Architecture and his master's of architecture and urban design from Washington University, St. Louis. For the past 30 years, he has also taught as university professor, lecturing extensively in India and abroad, and receiving several honors and awards. He was conferred the 2019 Award for Distinction in Architecture by Washington University, USA, and has also been appointed as honorary professor at Jean Yangtong Liverpool University, Suzhou, China. Thank you so much for joining, sir. I would request you to kindly proceed with the presentation today.
Thank you so much for the introductions, and thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be speaking to all of you today. I thank the Marathwada Mitra Mandil College for inviting me for sharing my search for Nalanda. I also thank architect Girish Doshi, who made the introductions for this and made this possible. So with that, I will start on this journey of In Search of Nalanda. I just share my screen, and then just tell me in case the screen is not being shared, etc. Just give me a call before. Yeah, is my screen visible to you?
Yes, sir. Your screen is visible.
Okay. And you can hear me clearly?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are audible clearly.
All right. Thank you. Okay. You know, the word Nalanda is actually three words in Sanskrit. It's Na Alam Da, meaning no stopping the gift of knowledge. So it's the spring of knowledge, as they call it. Nalanda, as you know, is a renowned Buddhist monastic university in ancient Magda, modern-day Bihar, considered by historians to be the world's very first residential university and among the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. It was located near the city of Rajgriha, now Rajgir, and about 90 kilometers southeast of Patliputra, now Patna. Operating from 427 to 1197 CE, Nalanda was established during the Gupta Empire era and was supported by numerous Indian and Javanese patrons, both Buddhists and non-Buddhists. Over some 750 years, its faculty included some of the most revered scholars of Mahayana Buddhism. Nalanda Mahavihar taught 6 major Buddhist schools and philosophies, such as Yogacara, Sarvastivada, as well as subjects such as grammar, medicine, logic, and mathematics. Now, I'm going to just share with you the way I'm going to go about this presentation. First is the beginnings. I call it the beginnings because I think in all of us, there are deep hauntings that we reveal as we work. And so I would like to share that part of it. The second part, I think the continuing of that hauntings is what I call the power of ruins. And then the journey of how we discovered Nalanda again. Then the evolution of the master plan. And then making good neighbors and achieving net zero. It's a net zero campus, I think one of the largest in the world. Evolving an architectural language. There are some views that I will be sharing. It's still under construction, not completed. However, it'll give you a fairly good idea of where we are. And then I'll end up with the idea of what are truly smart cities, or what I consider as truly smart cities. So I look at, all the work that I do now. After 30 years of practice, or actually 35 years of practice now, I look back and I say, what are the fundamentals of the way I practice? And I say there is this connection with the celestial that we have. And then there is the connection that we have of our day to day, these things of the sun rising in the east and setting in the west, the moon coming up, and those cycles. And the third one is circumstantial, of the history, geography of the place. And these are things that are all interconnected in the ways that we deal with them. So, I wrote this in my diary, and I'll just read it out to you. In the infinity of space, there are celestial bodies that help mark our position in relation to them, to share ephemerally their glory. The time scale they represent seems to suggest immutability, and yet we know they also change. We know that, the pole star today in the position that it is there will shift after a while, but the time span is so long that it is after many, many thousands of years that it shifts. So therefore, in human terms, it seems fixed. At the birth of a child in many cultures, a horoscope is cast to establish this relationship. Many believe that the horoscope is also immutable. Yet, as a wise forecaster will tell you that it only sets points of reference, which can accommodate circumstantial changes. I believe the architectural plan is perhaps similar to the casting of a horoscope. The moment you have fixed the plan, in some ways you have set its future, and yet that plan can still mutate with the circumstances happening outside. The circadian rhythm affects us biologically, as studies have shown. We also know that the change in the quality of light through the day in different seasons at different latitudes has played a significant role in the way architecture has been shaped over millennia to capture this phenomenon. The architectural section allows us to engage with this phenomenon. Space is defined by light, revealing matter. The material, texture, positioning, and acoustical resonance of this matter decides its revelation. Like a breath, our movement through space and the cadence experience makes it come alive, or what Le Corbusier called the promenade architecture. And lastly, a client's program, desires and dreams, social, cultural, geographical, and historical context all create circumstances that are not necessarily aligned but often paradoxical. The balancing of these paradoxes gives the impetus for the design to emerge. So all of us try and struggle with all these, opposites as such, and we try and reconcile them in different ways. I must also share with you what I've experienced when I went to Nalanda. And I wrote, it seems I've been waiting a lifetime for this moment. The many photographs in books, in tourist pamphlets and brochures do not prepare you for the reality of this magnificent pile of bricks. There is an aura that surrounds you no sooner than you enter the vicinity of these evocative bricks, voices, murmurs, or they just whispers of the wind. The guide drones on and on about their history, their chronology, but I believe he misses the point. I stand amidst the ruins of the Nalanda Mahavira, 8 centuries of decay, and yet their life continues beyond the earlier 8 centuries. When they formed a community of bricks, forming spaces for learning, residing, frugal spaces for the life of a seeker. Ruins are stimuli allowing our minds to journey towards the indefinite, the distant, and the remote to satisfy the aspiration for the infinite, for something that vanishes in distant time or space whose measure is lost. The complexity, the richness of ruins lies within the deep temporal relationships revealed by the presence of reminders of mankind's building efforts accumulated over time. The present day is never divorced from a sense of timelessness and universality. When a building loses its functionality or integrity, it continues to release a charge over time that we define as poetic. It continues to elicit our emotions, however different from those that were originally aroused. The beauty about ruins is their enigma. One never knows the exact size, shape, or form of the building, or the spaces between, or even the life that took place. But the excavations suggest possibilities and potentials for all of these. They allow our imagination to trace diverse interpretations and meanings, and our sensibilities in extremely exciting ways. They engage our thoughts and dreams and make that time and place ours. They allow us to transcend time and space. I have often wondered about my fascination with ruins. Does it spring from the fact that in our country, the residues of past civilizations and empires still populate the present? Ruins of cities, forts, and temples continue amongst newer construction. Myths and legends, festivals and rituals bind them into our daily reality. Past, present, and future are all ambiguous and do not show clear distinctions. Time is not linear and certainly without end or beginning. You could be living in the 12th century or the 21st, all within the distance of a few streets or a few hours. Is my fascination because I spent 7 years of my childhood in a fort, or is it because in the process of making a building, it is for a while incomplete and appears as a ruin, but once complete, loses that primordial sense of being? Does this affect my perception of the world? Does it color the way I think and the way I design? I believe it does. Some of the themes that bind my work have evolved from this content. From the age of 9 to 16, I was in a boarding school within an ancient fort which came into existence in the 8th century AD. The fort sat on a rocky plateau some 300 feet up in the air and dominated the surrounding plains and plateaus of central India. I'm talking about the Gwalior fort. The fort was built over centuries. It had several palaces, mostly in ruins, water harvesting tanks, temples, some still in use, others derelict, several layers of walls, ammunition batteries now filled with hordes of bats nesting in them, many barracks and several more recent structures. Their vintage ranged in age from several years to several centuries. There seemed no rational or specific order. They were built, added on, modified depending on the circumstances. They seem to reflect the acceptance of change in social, economic, and cultural lifestyle of different eras, be they good or bad. The juxtaposition of these fragments of structure which each other allowed a variety of scales to be experienced. They were intimate and they were grand structures, but strangely often the grandeur was intimate, depending on how I chose to move. It is like a thali. We can mix things as we please, our instinct guides our impulse, and unexpected combinations are discovered in the long run. I'm pleased because I filled my appetite with something more than what I had expected. Ruins are about incompleteness. They allow your imagination space to move towards a vision of more completeness. Should our architecture then be about incompleteness? Incompleteness is about possibilities and potentials that can, when necessary, be tapped on to add, modify, and transform. I have been fortunate to have the opportunity to work on several scales of projects simultaneously. I have been engaged with many cities with all their complexity in terms of planning and urban design schemes of several square kilometers, several institutional campuses of hundreds of acres, and of course, individual buildings and homes. Practice, as I have discovered, is always about omissions, additions, and circumstantial situations. Committees will pare down budgets. New programs will get added on even while the construction is going on. And surveys on hilly terrain are notoriously inaccurate, and rocks pop out of the ground where least expected. I have discovered the paradoxes of scale, diversity of function, all work better with open-ended, loosely structured plans, which allow for new discoveries in space and form, and allow a unique expression to my work. I shall now share with you the search for Nalanda. So this is the first sketch. Firstly, this was an international competition where there were about 80 applicants, out of which 8 were shortlisted to participate, out of those 8, 5 were tie-ups with international firms, some very well-reputed international architects were participating. And we were on our own steam, of course. And we were given a time period of 60 days to answer a very evocative brief that had been done by the promoters. The jury was international. We had jury members from China, Singapore, uh, India, and from I think the fourth one was from, if I remember, from Japan. Yes, from Japan. And this 60 days that we were given, we were to also first pre-qualify by giving a report on the net zero making of this university. So it was also a double challenge as such. Now, this brief was very interesting, and we started actually 15 days after we were, for various reasons, we didn't start the process. And strangely enough, we finished one day in advance, so that I think there was something, I call it prophetic, that you were taking part in it. Um, and the brief talked about these lotus ponds that had been made in the quarries that the earth was excavated to make the bricks of the ancient Mahavihara. And so these are the first sketches that I did in my diary to show this would be a land of water where water would be collected. There would be places where buildings would surround that waters, and there would be places and shrines where this would happen. And I had no idea, I mean, how this was all going to start off, but this was the first sketch. So again, in section, you can see, this area gets about 1200 of rainfall. Often it floods. Sometimes there are droughts also, despite the flooding. So the question was that in a country like this, in a land like this, how do you build? And the most obvious way was what you see in that part of Bihar, or you see in parts of Bengal, etc. You dig and you make a pond, and the earth that you take up, you mound and you build on top of that. So the sketch sort of tried to explain that concept. And on the other side was, what are the people that surround you? There is this odd-shaped piece of land of 455 acres, but there are villages in the immediate surroundings, about 5 villages, and what will happen to them? And they're all marginal agricultural farmers. 1.5 acres is the general sort of size of their land holding. And we started wondering, can the environmental school, that is going to be one of the schools that was part of the program, can provide knowledge and techniques to enhance the agricultural potential of these land holdings, to avoid speculative sale of land to builders, etc. Because the moment you start, you build out here, and you announce, in fact, the moment you announce that there is a university coming, all the land values around it would start shooting up. And of course, savvy builders would come around and start buying the land and making towers out there that would start overlooking the university grounds. The other part was that, how do you locate something on the land? 455 acres is very large. Do you keep the connections that are there, which cut across your land? Do you have a bulk of your land which is going to be for agriculture? How are you going to demarcate this thing? And so, and how does the water come from the Rajgiri hills, which are in a background, and slopes towards the Ganga, which is in the far distance? So these kinds of drawings and sketches started happening, where you can see 2 days after that first sketch, there is this thing talking about veins that will feed up water bodies, will connect up together and drain the land. And as we discovered while doing these sketches, there was a team that was doing research to find out that there is a system called the Ahar and Pine scheme, which is traditional in Bihar, where they make these channels and they're holding ponds and they connect them together to irrigate the fields. And so this sketch was, again, very much in, without knowing about it, but in similar veins that we discovered. So the land, if you really see it, this is a satellite image that was supplied to us. And if you see this, you will start seeing out here that there is a village here, 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 and there is a village here. And our boundary sort of touched upon some of these, cut in, made this, and went around like that. And on the other far side, there was a railway embankment out here, which is here. And this is how a boundary went. So if you start studying the land very carefully, this was the national highway where our main entry would be from here. In the future, there was another road proposed here, but whether that would happen or not, we didn't know. And so this is the kind of information that we had. Uh, and then very significantly, I think we discovered that there was some kind of a water that used to collect. And this is clay soil, so that water would collect and remain here for most of the year. It would not dry up. So this was another clue that we looked at. Now, this is the water that collects in that. So you can see the clay soil, dark colored brown, and then you see the water collecting. The compound wall of the university has already been made when they got the land. And in the backdrop of all of this is the Rajgir Hills. Now, the Rajgir Hills are very, very famous. It's a place of pilgrimage. The Buddha came and meditated out here. Mahavir came out here and meditated. So for both Jains and Buddhists, it's a very sacred place. Even for the Sikhs, one of the gurus came here and meditated here. So therefore, this land is sacred land. These hills are sacred. And so the question was that when you build something here, would you remember that there is a sacredness to the place, that this is hallowed ground? So what I was talking about earlier was about this thing, and there is this tension between the two to somehow connect these two water bodies, the land and the water. And being a net zero campus, we had to have our own sources of water without digging into the ground, no bore wells, only surface runoffs from the rain. We had to manage all our waste on site, and we had to also take care of all our energy needs on campus. So all these were part of the net zero, part of the challenge that was thrown at us. So this is how the plan evolved. Now it shows you sketches. It shows you that how you start trying to connect those water bodies, and then the water bodies take on more definitive shapes, and then the zoning of various things that happen around it, what surrounds it. And we looked at many examples of temple towns, of Mmcoa, etc. How these channels would connect up together, and how did we have to locate this? So the location came about by where you could make the largest collection of water in some ways. And so now you can see in this one, so there is a central pond that connects the water bodies here and here which exist. And then there are channels that flow from here, connect into this. There are channels that will flow in here and connect through a series of ahar and pine drains and smaller retention ponds, etc., which flow from here. There are ones that slope down towards this side and collect water. So we were looking at all this of how, though it's supposed to be considered flat land, there are very gentle slopes, and how could we sort of work with that even little bit of slope that was there. And also remember that sometimes it floods out here. There are rains, heavy rains come, and the whole place floods. So we needed to make sure that the campus, once designed, the entire campus could be safeguarded from flooding. So finally, what we came to was this sketch. And this sketch was about, as I said, like that ancient temple towns. There is tanks which are interconnected together. The various facilities which are shared happen in between. This is here and here. And then faculty and the staff housing happens on the other side here. And the student housing happens on another side. And they connect up to these and share these. And the center becomes the library, the fulcrum of the whole thing. And we also started looking at fluctuating levels. You collect water, but there will be evaporation losses. You will consume the water also. So levels would rise and change over the year, over the seasons. And so therefore, we wanted to make this tank in such a way that certain things emerge out of it, that it gets flooded and then it emerges. So that's another story, that there is a past which perhaps is not there. There are no remains or ruins on this land. However, they may emerge and seem apparent as if they had emerged from the ground. Now we all know that rainfall is not about just collecting the rain, but the runoff it generates from the roofs is different from the area where it falls on the ground, and on the landscape it is different. And then some will go into the soil and some will be lost to evaporation. So we decided that very early on, all the roof runoff, much like our ancient towns, would be collected in underground water tanks, and that would require the least amount of energy to filter it to supply about drinking water. The paved runoff, because there would be more impurities on the paved areas on the ground, would require more energy to be made to drinking water fitness, but it could be used for other things. So therefore, for irrigation, for cleaning various areas, for washing, etc., we could filter this at a lesser energy cost, and that could be used. And the landscape area would be recharging, of course, into the aquifers. So with this, we started working out our strategy of water balance, as we call it. The other aspect was that how far can you walk comfortably in the kind of weather that is? It's a hot, humid climate, but you need heavy thermal mass during the summers because it gets extremely hot, and you need breeze to blow through. So you need also perforation at certain levels. And so there is this combination that you have to work with. It is not hot, humid in the traditional sense where you have very light structures. So the walkability, we decided that from the heart of the campus to the edge of the campus would be 10 minutes along landscape areas. And so that 10-minute circle, considering about 80 meters a minute of an average person walking comfortably, we decided to use that as a basis to decide the distance that we would like to traverse, and the whole entire campus should fit in that with all its phases. The other part was, this was another layer, the excavations that we needed for the water. So we have about almost 40 hectares of water bodies, about 22% of the land. And then you have, of course, not only the water bodies as such, but you also have elevated service reservoirs. You have underground drinking water tanks for storage, and you have sewage treatment plants. Almost 80% of sewage is recycled, and that is water. So you get back water, and that is used for the farming and the irrigation. And then along these parts of the water and the buildings, within that you have courts and you have connections, and so pedestrian networks start emerging from that. And then obviously we need access for service vehicles, we need access for emergency vehicles, but we also need on a daily basis e-mobility, as we call it. So there'll be this golf cart like battery buses that would pick you up from the parking lots at the periphery at the gates and take you inside, and there are bus stops all over, so that people could hop on and off if they didn't feel like walking on a certain day, or if you're aged or you're too young, you could also hop on and off. So this is something that was introduced into the plan. So these are the various layers that make this plan. So you can see the water body in the center, which is here. And then you see several other large water bodies, which are the retention ponds. So in case we collect all our water into these also, and this is then pumped from here, from all these retention ponds, which are there. This water is pumped here. So the levels in these can vary, but the central one then remains always full. So as we develop this plan, the idea became that we should always keep the central one full, and that's where we use it. Now the central one is visible to all. So if you pollute it, you're polluting your water. So therefore that became very important also as a strategy. And all of these feed into the other retention ponds in the periphery, feed into this. So this shows you the Rajgir Hills and a model to show you in 3D what actually was being implied. So you see the main campus and its major facilities spread in this area. Uh, and all the residential areas then flank it, and the student residential areas, as you can see, are very dense. And so we have been trying out that how do you get a density that you would get in a city, and yet you'd still get open spaces for badminton courts, volleyball courts, informal interaction areas, etc. within this, and you'd get terraces that would look into it. So it's a very high density program in a limited space. However, it is still functional within the climatic boundaries that we are working with. Now, if you compare the plan, you see the plan is almost as large as Venice in size in terms of the length and the width of it. However, the density, of course, is far, far less. And if you compare this to Sarkej Rosa, that is number 5 out here, you see the tank is about one third the size. Our tanks are about 2 times larger than Sarkej Rosa. And then this is Jaipur. It shows you the palace complex. It shows actually 4 quadrants of Jaipur. The number 2 is the Forbidden City in Beijing as a comparison. And 3 is Srirangam. And 4th is showing you Fatehpur Sikri and its size compared to what we are building here. This is just to give you a sense of scale. Now, in comparison, also the parts of it are mentioned, as I mentioned, are things that how do you get a sense of measure of things? And so this ruins which have been excavated of Nalanda are about 500 meters from the furthest temple to the last cloister out here next to the stupa of Sariputra is about 500 meters. This is the distance our academic spine with all its schools stretches out. And this is the distance from the hostels when you come to the library. This is also the distance from one end of the hostels to the other end of the hostels. So the same measure is taken to sort of get a sense of scale of these various things. The schools of the various components of the university happen like this, that they're all laid out in this manner. But along the spine, so it's like cutting a slice of a cake, However, in this spine, all the classrooms are shared. So the faculty rooms and the laboratories are exclusive, but the classrooms are all shared within this and make this continuous space so that all the schools also talk to each other. Another very important aspect, as I mentioned in the beginning, was about making good neighbors. And so we had read in the literature that was available that 200 villages used to contribute the required amount of provisions for the 3,000 monks and students that were, that Jagir used to supply the provisions for all these monks and their sustenance. This is what the king had decided during the Gupta period. Now, we decided that this should be reversed because today there are marginal farmers. And how do you make a handshake with the villagers in the surrounding area? And so this became a major theme of the way we designed the university. And when we looked at the resource cycle, what became very clear to us that managing energy would become a classic handshake, that they have organic waste, which is there, which we can use to generate electricity. And that could be used as a resource that we would borrow from them. Besides, of course, buying food, etc., allowing them, giving them in advance money for agriculture so that they would be assured of that our supply of food, that they would be able to sell it, etc. So all these became very important in the design of the university. So we did a study and we found that in a 4-kilometer radius around the university, there is about 1,000 people per square kilometers, which is the waste that is generated is about 230 kilograms per square kilometer. There are about 100 buffaloes per square kilometer. There are about 200 cows that are in the region. There are about 100 goats, 50 chickens, 10 pigs, etc. And if you start looking at the waste that is generated from that, you could uh, use all of that, including biomass, that is agriculture, crops and residues seasonally, sewage, collect from the city of Rajgir, which is only 3 kilometers away, municipal solid waste, animal residues, industrial residues, forestry, crops and residues, etc. And use an external combustion, use all this biomass after generating gas from it and using it for an external combustion engine, which requires very low calorific fuel. So any gas would work with this. Any gobar gas would work with this. This would also generate heat, and that heat would be used to dehumidify our air and the water that that we would be using for cooling the air conditioning. And this evaporative cooling would be a first stage, and after that would you have normal air conditioning. So your costs of air conditioning or energy usage would go down. This would be mixed with, of course, photovoltaics. But being in the region where it is, the number of sun days is much less, the number of days with cloud cover, and especially in winter, etc. So therefore, the question comes that you would need power not only for the night, but you would also need power during the daytime when there is this kind of overcast skies. And keeping that in mind and using cow tech instead of high tech became our mantra. The other aspect that we looked at was land and water, as I mentioned to you earlier. So we did a very quick calculation in the initial part. Now, of course, that has been authenticated to a large extent, that for construction, if we could use the same soil that we were excavating to collect the water that we needed for our annual usage, then that soil could be made into compressed earth block. So you would not be using fired bricks, but you would be using compressed earth block, and the uh, soil that would come out from these would be used for that. So for the first convocation, you can see the president at that time, Pranab Mukherjee, and the president who became president later on is presently a president, Sri Ramnath Kovind, also there for the first convocation. And a souvenir made out of the soil of Nalanda was presented to them. And you can see him, of course, touching it with admiration of sacred soil. With the emblem of the university was presented to them. So the other next most important aspect was, what is the kind of language that would evolve? So from plans, you start coming to the actual construction of things. And then you start saying that what kind of a kit of parts would you make, which would be repetitive in nature, which could add and form different kinds of spaces, etc. And so this is what we had sketched during the competition, and that came out. So there was one part where there were lots of faculty rooms and research scholars, etc., which we called the Cloisters of Contemplation. So there were courtyards, they were making courtyards between them, and we wanted them to look into gardens, into these courtyards. And so therefore they were not in one straight line, but they were connecting through and through into various parts. There were some which were single story, there were some which were 2 stories, and some which were 3 stories. So they started climbing up, and I'll come to the section why that was so. And then there were common classrooms in between, and then there were attached laboratories, as you can see out here, and which we called from the Cloisters of Contemplation to the Bazaar of Knowledge, and finally to the incubators of innovation, which are the laboratories. And this was the landscape that would flow. So this, from the central lake, water would be drained into it from these parts out here and go into that, and the edge would be a public space. And so therefore these cloisters that I'm talking about, this was 1 floor, 2 floor, 3 floor. These were almost 4 floors out here because they had higher heights, and then the laboratories would step back. So it was a stepped section that sort of worked right through the thing. And the landscape would be penetrating not only into this courtyard, but actually going in and flowing in. The idea was that could we use this landscape to penetrate into the building, so that the whole idea of building and landscape, inside, outside, is combined. The other aspect was that every time we visited after we won the competition and we looked at the ruins, and it has always been a place of pilgrimage that every visit you go to the ruins, you see this serrated edges of brick that have been left out there, that have been excavated by the, I don't think they were, I think, straighter walls, but these were, after the excavations, this is what was left of the ruin. And so you see, even when there are straight walls, the top portion has been serrated like that. And we said, could we use something like that as the basis for the design? And so we got a truck full of soil while we was, before the contractors came on board, etc. We got a whole truckload of soil from the site in to Ahmedabad. And there we worked with a specialist working on compressed earth block to check the efficacy of using this soil, changing the color because it was very gray, whether we could add some sooty in it and what percentage of soil, and cement in it, and then test them for its strength and its water absorption and its long-term sort of stability over many, many monsoons. So this is what we did with that soil that came there. While this is going on, you're also thinking about this kit of parts that I was mentioning to you. So we were looking at that if the periphery walls were made as service walls, where all our AHUs, staircases, toilets, etc., which do not require air conditioning, are placed. So like the ruins, you have these thick walls, very thick walls. And inside the spaces, because of the shade of this, and if there was a roof that covered it, would be like a veranda. So it would be a place that would be cooler. And so therefore that cooling of those spaces would take less energy. And so we came out with the periphery. There's roofs that would be there, much like an umbrella to collect the water, or classrooms that would be larger ones above and the smaller ones, meeting rooms, etc., at the lower level, so that they would have more privacy and more acoustical privacy. And then the stupa, we thought of it as what is the nature? And it is almost like the Buddha is in meditation. And that is how the stupa originally originated, as we found out. And it is almost like radiating energy in the center. So with this combination, from protection from the sun, the water, to gather people, to protect from the sun, to collect water, and to gather people, the shikhara, or the gopurams, as we eventually called them, all of these sort of evolved. And you can see these sketches as they happen. And even in the parts where there were slightly different forms, we had double walls. So the peripheral wall is a thick double wall with landscape in between, and it gets limited openings, and it gets light from both sides. It gets light from the sky, which reflects down and comes in. So it is muted light because, as you know, our light is very, very harsh, and you need surface to make it cool. And this area in between then becomes the barrier to cool this down. So you can have almost glass out here, and this becomes heavy with limited openings in it. So this is the form and shape that started coming out of a standard module, but the top part of it after 5.4 meters would change for openings depending on what you were looking at, which direction you were facing, etc. And so this became a game to be played out depending on the circumstances. So this gives an idea of the section that one was looking at. So this peripheral wall is the service wall that we are talking about. These are the classrooms that sit out there. And these are the public spaces in between. So there are no corridors as such, which sit in between. Now, what's interesting was the moment you started taking this classrooms of different sizes, this is a 35-seater, this is a 50-seater, etc., you started forming an inverse stupa out here of empty space. And you could control the light because you had limited light coming in from the top out here, which would bounce off, and this whole surface would get limited light coming into it. rather than large amounts of light which cannot be controlled, or cool light as I call it. So this is the kit of parts. So there was these 4 parts: the service walls or gopurams, the gateways within those gopurams, the climate tower where our DVAP system for air conditioning and cooling this place would sit out here, and then the learning center where the classrooms would be. And then the peripheral walls had another game going on. This was what we call the hieroglyphics or the language of the walls. So you have a standard straight uh, wall, and then it changes into different shapes and forms, as I said, circumstantially. And this makes a language of the periphery. So if the outside temperature is 45 degrees on campus, we would expect it to be, at least because of the landscaping, etc., 2 to 3 degrees cooler. And the inside space in the shaded areas, this thing would be in the region of about 32 to 35 degrees because of the shade and the breeze blowing through it, through these openings. And so therefore, we would have to go from this 32 or 35 degrees to 24, which means that you're not going from 45 to 24, which is almost 21 degrees difference. You've reduced it to about 8 or 10 degrees. So this is what I'd sort of emphasized to you earlier. It shows you the stupa that is being formed in inverse. Now, as I mentioned to you, if you look at our old ruins, you find that the light hits these sides, and this large surfaces with limited openings in it allows this place to glow the way it glows out here. And so therefore, this is the shape and form that somehow started making a lot more sense in here. Except that our sources of light were, with the kind of technology we are using today as against those, you didn't need the arches, and those light came in from this and bounced off and came down. So as you can see out here, there are fragments. Instead of having a one solid, clear definition of buildings, there is a sort of a ambiguity. There is a porosity. There's a permeability that you have many routes to go into a place. It is not controlled from one. So there are separate buildings, interlinked in many ways. However, the choices it offers you, and so therefore the landscape also comes in. So if you see here, this is the outer court in some ways. However, it also comes in into these areas. It connects to all these parts of it also. And there's a continuum that comes in and out here also. So you have a series of isolated looking fragments, but together they make something larger, something much more collectively much larger. So this was the idea of this kind of a building network that has been produced. And so therefore, also you can also build incrementally if you so decide to do so. This is another section that I was explaining to you all earlier. So this is the outer periphery wall with the light coming in out here. And the views that you get from here are controlled views so that the amount of heat or glare is limited. So stepping up from the water bodies from the edge of the central tank, or Kamal Sagar as we've named it, you climb up from one end to the other and you step up and you come to these areas finally. And then the classrooms, and then of course the laboratories. Now here is a comparison of, at the same scale, this was a poster done in 2016, but it shows you how the various cloisters of the excavations and the scales of spaces within the new buildings, or this is just the first space that we put out here, which shows you a comparison of these different scales that are there. And this then translated into this kind of a three-dimensional form. So this is a model showing you from the water body at this edge of the lakes that were being formed, and then the stepping up terraces climbing up to this path. Now, this is a little tongue-in-cheek. You know, there is this famous painting by Raphael in the Vatican called the uh, School at Athens, and it shows from Michelangelo sitting here. It has Plato and Aristotle, which are in actually different times, walking together and sharing this thing. So knowledge is not something that happens only inside the classroom. It happens by walking. It happens while talking. It happens informally through not only your teachers, but through peers and through other people as such. And so therefore, we said, where is the school of Athens, if supposing it was to happen in Nalanda, where would that happen? And therefore, this drawing came up, which shows you the same people, perhaps even more people out here from India who would be walking through. And this would be the part where the same scene could be imagined. And this is the connector as you enter the campus and you drive in after your scenic drive, you sort of arrive at this place and you come in through this, and the rest of the campus then spreads out before you. So that was what the rest of the campus, if you took a drone and flew up in the air, this is what it would appear like, with the library sitting in the center of these four lakes, the sports centers and the various faculty clubs, etc., and health center on the other side, the shopping through it. And connecting through it as the student facilities, the large amphitheater. There are places for small informal classrooms in the winters and in the summers, in the evenings and early mornings, which connect to it. And all the various schools happen on this side, here and so on and so forth. And then even the campus inn and the international center, which are like hotels, happen. And the faculty then bungalows and the residences happen on one side, and the student hostels happen on the other side. So this is what the campus will eventually look like. And the library in the center is something that has just been awarded to a separate contractor. This is the third main contractor coming on board. There are two already there. And this has a series of reading halls, etc., which connect up to the central reading hall out here. And then there are various service facilities in between. And the periphery is like a giant stupa that has been cut into four parts. And being a ruin, it is shifted in one part, which you can see out here. And it sits in the center as the nerve center of the whole campus, as the heart of the whole campus. Now, while we were doing this, we got the, as I said, the bricks made. We only got 19 tons of the sample made, that how would it react during earthquakes. And so this was a test done at the Nirma University with all the various things for on a shake table, where a 2-ton load is used to hit the shake table to see if you have a 6.5 or 7 Richter scale earthquake, what would happen and how would this survive. And so it was very successful, of course, but it also ensured that nobody's ever used compressed earth block to the quantum that we are using out here. And so therefore it is important to demonstrate where the new contractor had just come on board, to show them that this is possible, because in government contracts they would very often say this is not possible, and this we have not quoted for this, we will charge extra for this, etc., and this would come in. So this was something that was done to demonstrate to them. And then, of course, piling started. This is clay soil, so we had to have 12.5-meter deep piles. We had to start making blocks. The factory for that was to be set up. It was part of the tender. Water excavation tanks were the first things that were excavated, and from the first monsoon onwards, we used that water for all our construction, so that there was a good source of water. Then, of course, the samples of burnt brick and earth block were put together, to see what will be the kinds of effects on each of these. So all these, as any job, you get samples and mock-ups done, and this started happening. Then we have designed that I have a brick from the old ruins in Manila. I took it from the ASI. They were invited to bring them after we won the competition. And I said, each brick after 1200 years or whenever, when this is finished or over, and there are only ruins left, they should have the stamp of the Nalanda University. So therefore, this was the logo of Nalanda University in these molds. And you can see how the bricks were made are all automated because of these large quantities. And both the main contractors have been making this brick on site. And so these are just some pictures to show you how the excavations, then from those excavations of the tanks, the buildings start, the piling, and from the piling, the buildings start coming up. And here you can notice the red earth, this thing is the burnt brick up to plinth level, some places higher than plinth level. And then the brown part of it is the compressed earth block. And also what is interesting is that, there was a shortage of burnt brick in between because that had not been planned and therefore they were not getting. So more earth block was used in certain parts. There was a shortage because the curing had not happened of the earth block. So therefore burnt brick was used. And so it's a mix of these, taking circumstantial situations into hand and playing with that. There is no clear definition of one or the other. Actually, if you go to the old ruins, you will find similar situations out there, though they haven't used compressed earth block, but different sizes of blocks have been used. And you'd be amazed at the variety of joints and blocks, bricks that are there in the actual old ruins. So we also let these kinds of situations, to take care of them by mixing things up. And I think that is the strength of when you mix things up. So these are the buildings under construction and the tanks. And then these are some of the more finished things as they're reaching towards the faculty, the cloisters, the school in between. Again, faculty cloisters with a single court. And then, of course, the major thing was these large structures, which would take the classrooms and the DWAP systems on their roofs and covered things. And you can see that the grand scale that they stand up. And so when you first went there and we saw the first ones be shuttered, and you can see me standing there, it's this amazing sense of scale and volume that fills you. And then the way the light filters through the different layers from the top, it comes down, hitting various surfaces, and that starts becoming very obvious. And then you can start seeing the quality. Importantly, what happened? Can you see my screen? It got cut off in between.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay. So this is the kinds of spaces that start happening. You can see some of the classrooms and the towers that are there. And very, interesting quality of light and scale that starts happening. And then these have variations. It's not only that there is only one type used. You can see out here, there are offices that are there. So these offices span this 18 meters across by a waffle plate. And the kind of quality of light through this atrium that is in the center will start happening in this. So this is just to show you that quality of light that you start getting from the harsh sun outside to the inside, the difference. And then, of course, the missing stupa in between. And then here we have all brick because this thing was not available at that point, so we use all brick, and you can see the kind of quality of walls, like old ruins that are there, large, heavy, big, these things. But once you go into that space inside these walls, you find that it is actually allowing you views to the outside, which are very light, which are light filled, which are easy. So there's this contrast between the sort of outside and the inside which one wanted to emphasize. So between the fragility of the inside to the harshness of the outside, how do you sort of mediate? And these are again some more examples to show you how the campus is now reaching completion. These are some drone views taken from the university. And then those amphitheaters for informal classrooms, etc. So you can see some of that also. And also the shopping areas and student facilities within these shells as you walk through as a covered bazaar. So that gives you an idea from the amphitheater, the connections to the main academic blocks. And then some of those spaces in the market areas, etc., as you walk through them. The market area. Now the hostels were also a takeoff on the Nalanda cloister. Instead of a straightforward courtyard of just one type of room and facilities, we decided to make a cluster of student hostels, which were like little apartments. But together they form a large court. And in that court, very much like in the old things where there are granaries, there are kitchens, there are other things that are added in the court, we added meeting spaces within. So the typical cluster is the same form, but it has three different variations. One is where there is two-seater rooms which are shared with common toilets. Then there are individual rooms with attached bathrooms, and then there are apartments for married students which have two rooms, which is a sort of a living study space and a separate bedroom with a kitchenette and a toilet. But they all from the outside look the same. The shared spaces in between are also the same. And they form different clusters around this place. And then they are made out of mostly up to the first level, up to the plinth, they're burnt brick, and then after that there are CBSE, and they're all load-bearing structures. So this is all, the strength of this block is quite good. It is as good as the burnt brick. And then they have their little alcoves and balconies that stick out where there are study tables for the students to use. And then the terraces sort of also climb up and down in this because there are different heights, as you can see. This is the gates that you enter through, much reminiscent of the ruins. And then you come in here and you have these, and as you can see, there are many, many terraces happening at different levels within this. Similarly, for the faculty houses, there are two types. There are the bungalow types, which again have slight variations in the roof thing, and they're essentially like tubes, which allow the east-west breeze through in these things, and they have two floors. And then we have apartments, which are all 4 floors, and they have large different typologies. There are 4 different types of apartments, from very large to smaller ones, depending on the hierarchy. So this is a view of where it is now, where things are getting completed across the lakes. The landscaping, the finishing of various things is going on. It still needs to be completed. Some of the buildings have been occupied and others are still to be occupied. And then last year I was invited to by the Royal Academy of Art by an exhibition curated by David Ajay to submit some artwork for this exhibition in London. And I submitted these 2 scrolls, as I call them, and which are about Nalanda. So it was about geography and architecture. And it showed that the present context, the excavations that we have done, the material that has been obtained, and the collection of water that goes hand in hand with this excavation, which allows the campus to be formed. And that becomes the place of learning of life. And all of it combined together makes habitation. So these posters were exhibited out there. And lastly, I come to what I call the pebble in the pond effect or smart cities. There's a lot of talk about smart cities. I think one of the greatest opportunities we have of smart cities is that most of these campuses that we've been working on in through various competitions, etc., whether they're IIMs or IITs, etc., the moment they are formed, as you can see out here, they will become the fulcrum of change. All this will keep getting added on. The villages will change and transform, and cities will happen. And so, therefore, think of them that they will link up in some ways to these campuses. These common spaces will become wonderful places or repositories for the gardens and parks for the town that will be growing around them. And so, therefore, if you start planning like that and planning the areas around that, it would make a huge difference in the ways that our cities would be. And you would have truly smart people, smart facilities that could be shared with the community, because the government in any case is investing so much money in doing a campus. Now, the question is that we should be also capitalizing on what will happen in the surroundings and plan for it properly from the day you announce a campus. One must plan for it properly. Even though this will be all private land, I think the planning can be done. And therefore, by land pooling, etc. So we have already made a proposal to the government of Bihar. Twice they've sort of tried to move on it, and then COVID came in between, etc. However, this is something that is likely to happen. And so we look at it as that when you do a campus, it's not only about the campus that you're focusing on, but is it going to be part of a larger system of the city? And therefore, the densities, you're taking stewardship of, say, the land and public spaces that a city of this nature, as it grows, would need. So with that, I thank you for your time. I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, sir. It was such a wonderful presentation and a mesmerizing journey, actually, to see how the master plan and from there how the forms got evolved. Such inspiring forms. I request all the attendees, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box so we can take them. We do have one question here by architect Tanay Bhavane. He asks that during the development of the project, how much was the idea influenced by the layout of Nalanda?
In the Nalanda, if you see, is a linear excavation. If you've seen the plan, so yes, as a measure of distance and attention to it, it was important. And we also, my speculation is that Nalanda, again, even though each vihara had a guru, it was not, or a teacher, it was not only learning that happened in the cloister as such, or in that, vihara. It was also when they walked along this between the temples and the viharas, there is this 500-meter walk. When they walked and they talked, they learned from each other. And the difference was they were not sitting and facing each other. You see, very often we think of teaching as you sit on one side and the student, you are actually co-learners. And when you are co-learners, you are walking side by side and speculating about things and seeing things together. Now, that's a big difference in attitude. So we took that as an attitude. Whether that's fact or fiction, I do not know. I'm only speculating. And we have used that very often in any of our campuses to say, look, we are co-learners. We are not teachers per se.
Yes, sir. So from what you just said, that when walking together and when they're looking at different things and then contemplating, the discussion also is happening the same way. This reminds me of the conversation you were having with Doshi sir, discussing about how people think when they're walking and then they're facing together and when they talk. So those thought process, I can see that everyday's life can get transformed into your design principles as well. The project of such a scale, it's actually a huge responsibility that a project that is going to become a part of the heritage. Now, since your previous heritage from the Nalanda University, you're taking it forward and you're creating something, the development that is going to come now, it's going to transcend and it has to live with all the people throughout the generations. So that's a daunting task. How does one go about it?
Well, I think firstly, if our ancestors could do it, are we not strong enough to follow in their footsteps? I think I feel that it's okay if you fail. You learn from your failures. At the worst, you can fail, no? So I don't see it as a daunting task. I think we must have the same courage as our ancestors to prove that yes, we can still do wonderful things. We can still do large scale things that happened over there in earlier times. So I don't see it as a problem. Yes, it is a challenge because you're doing some things for the first time, but that challenge is also something that once you decide to take it on, you'll find ways to match it, no? Because you're proud of the fact that you can match it. You don't want to give up. So yes, there are challenges, but you will face them.
Yes, yes, very true, very true. I request again all the audience, if at all they have any question, they can put it in the chat box. So I was also curious about the net zero approach. The way you mentioned that you have taken cow tech and you have taken it forward. Uh, so how does it exactly work? In the sense that you talked about converting the biomass through external combustion and taking the energy from there. So
No, one step in between. First of all, you change it into gas. So it's like if I put it very simply, you know what a gobar gas plant is. You
yes,
put all the things out there and let it ferment, and the gas comes out, right? You get methane. Now, methane is a low calorific gas. So the external combustion engine is useful that it needs only low calorific gas. It doesn't need high octane fuel. Where you have an internal combustion engine, you need high octane fuel. Whereas when you use low calorific fuel, so it's good enough for the engine to run because it has a sealed uh, uh, coupling in it. So therefore, the idea of using something that was actually a very old technology and now again is coming into fashion because people are looking at it, oh, we can even use solar, we can use this to run it. So therefore, we started sort of exploring that idea.
so we have another question by architect Shaunak Naik. He wants to know if what kind of challenges you faced while construction phase started. Was there any major challenge that you met?
Yes, I think the first challenge was to, this is a government project. So you have to go through a whole series of vetting by various experts. You have to have many, many reports and tests done. All your structures are checked by an independent authority from one of the IIMs, etc. That is at one level. The second level is that there are all kinds of experts that are brought in who will give you kinds of advice, which not necessarily focus on to what you're trying to achieve. So how do you steer that whole thing and hold on to your basic ideas right through it is a huge challenge. And you have to also remember that these are changing positions. So you are only the only constant. This is my third chancellor, second vice chancellor. The board has changed 3 times. Despite all of that, a large amount of what we've envisaged is getting built. Yes, there have been some changes. I'm not saying that they're exactly the same, but the master plan overall has not changed. The building language has not changed. The use of various materials has largely remained the same. Some of the finishing items may have changed somewhat. So I think there is a fair amount of these things that have been constant through it. So these are the challenges that you face in running something, especially if you're testing out new things. Where on one side, the university says it is net zero. On the other side, if it doesn't hold on to net zero uh, by various actions, then how do you bind them to that? Because that was how you started as your premise. So these are all the challenges I think that we've already gone through.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It seems that we don't have any questions that is coming from the audience, most probably because of the scale of work. All of them are dumbstruck and they're still trying to understand all these things. So the beauty of any material is how it ages throughout the time. So in the older Nalanda construction also we can see how the brick has aged, the kind of aging that happens. So You have used a combination of materials over here, that CACB, along with that you have playground bricks and concrete. How do you visualize it happening over the period of time? How do you visualize it aging?
I think that was the whole idea, that brick will age over time, will start having some kind of growth on it. Things will, organic stuff will grow onto it. And that itself adds to the beauty of the place. I think there is today a trend that we are timeless and ageless. Timeless in the wrong sense, huh? Timeless, not that you feel something out there, but timeless in the sense that you don't age at all. So if you use metal and other things, glass and a lot of that, that doesn't age too much. It remains the same. I think if you value your elders, age is an important aspect of that cultivation in your mind. And so, therefore, I believe that materials you should use should also age over time. They will need also maintenance and management of it properly over time. And so, therefore, you have to be engaged with this. You cannot just forget about it and say that this is not my job. Very often, our attitude has been that we forget, we build once and we say, oh, this doesn't require anything for next 50 years. And after 50 years, they say, oh, there is something wrong with this whole thing. We have seen enough things of it happening in recent times. You know about the IIM in Ahmedabad, you know about all of these stories. And so, therefore, I think we have as a society to come to terms that, what you build robustly, build it that it'll age, but it'll also require some minimal amount of maintenance over time. And that should carry on. So, therefore, make choices that can easily be replaced and replenished over time. So, all the exposed concrete work is mostly in the inside. The brickwork, which is cladding or load bearing, is on the outside, which you can change over time. And the what do you call the other material, which is compressed earth block, is also replaceable in the same way that brick is replaceable. So I look at it as that these are all things that can be done over time, and let them keep aging. When they reach a point where they can't be used at all, then replace them.
Thank you, sir. I see that there is one question from architect Rahul Kalam. How have you ensured design fidelity in such a large scale?
When you say fidelity, that's what I think you mean. Fidelity, right?
Yes.
It has followed a certain design. How have you ensured? Well, I think when you plan something, and something that is not very commonplace, then people are less prone to change or alter it, because they have not understood it fully till it's made. And only then do they start realizing the scale and space of it. And so, therefore, there is a continuity that goes through the design. Also, then there is a clarity of different parts of the design. We have said that, okay, there are 4 basic elements, the kinds of materials that are used. All of those come together to give it a continuity. I don't know if I'm not very clear about fidelity of the design, what the question is exactly. Are you saying in terms of supervising it? Well, we have an office there in Nalanda on the site, where there have been between 3 to, right now there's a single person, but who's overseeing also what happens. So therefore, there is some control over what is taking place.
I do hope that answered the question. There's another question from a student, Abhishek Mote. He asked that with such a great context to the ruins, how did you decide what to take as an inspiration and interpret it into the design, and what not to take?
Well, the whole idea of the notion of ruins, that's why I talked extensively in the beginning about the notion of ruins. Notion of ruins gives you an abstraction. It is not something, absolutely that you can copy straight away, but it should give you a feeling of that. And I think when you look at the kind of masses and the kinds of walls and the kinds of things, and you walk to the old Nalanda or you walk here, you will find that there is a resonance. And that is what we took from the old ruins as such. So there is not a literal taking off from that to say that this is the way. We looked at also, say, the way that they made bricks. So that's how we made compressed earth block from the same soil. We looked at how they collected water, and we used the same things. So there are not literal formal things that we have taken, but ideas that we have taken from there and continued. And then the formal part of it, we have chosen an abstract idea and explored that.
Thanks. Uh, I'll just remind the audience that we have posted a feedback form, so please fill that. There's another question by a student, Namita Jain. Amazing concept of Buddha for the in-between spaces created by classroom structure. I would like to know more about the structural stability or the sustainability of classroom where the base area is less than the topmost floor. It's like 1:3 in terms of its ratio from the base.
Yeah, that's a interesting question. You see, when we were, this is earthquake zone 4. That means it's a very earthquake prone area. And being a place of public gathering, it has to be 1.5 times stronger than normal buildings. So that was the other criteria that we had to deal with. Keeping both of these things in mind, when you have a structure which is not a continuous structure but separate structures, the vibrations during an earthquake can be handled much better. And so therefore you have this base and you have this roof coming out of it, as a cantilever coming out of it, but the space between the skylights of the roof, if you notice, is almost about 70 centimeters, so that in case of an earthquake, it's not just like a what you call a expansion joint. It is an exaggerated expansion joint, so that when they vibrate even in different things, they can still function comfortably. So we used all of these structural issues to actually come out with these isolated buildings, which actually behave much better in an earthquake than they would behave in the reverse. And of course, we wanted shade on top. So that was the other idea, that how do you get these large volumes with shade and limited light openings in that to control the light.
Thank you, sir. Sir, you mentioned light openings, and that gave me another thought that we are taking the light for the classroom through the double walls, and we are taking the reflected light that is coming inside. So, what is the quality of light in the interior spaces? How did you visualize it?
Actually, what happens is, as you go higher up, you see there are big cuts into the large walls, right? So the classroom has openings which open diagonally, and they see through these gaps. So when you're in the classroom, you not only see to the outside, but you are also getting reflected light coming in through that. So the quality of light inside is, you don't need artificial light at all during the daytime.
So through those openings, I can look in between those walls also.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It seems that we don't have any more questions, and absolutely amazing presentation, sir. Thank you so much for your time. On behalf of the management of Marathwada Mitra Mandal, our principal Dr. Ujjwala Parsale, our design chairs, architect Geesh Doshi and architect Ravi Prathan, and all the faculties and students, I thank architect Kathpalia for sharing his valuable time and insights. So this has been a wonderful session, and I'm sure that our students are inspired by your work and your words. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talking to all of you, and it was interesting that some of you had some interesting questions. Thank you once again.
I thank our management and principal also for making this event possible. I thank the Fountainhead coordinating team for their efforts and support. I also thank all the attendees who joined us today for today's session. I hope your continued support for the upcoming sessions under Fountainhead. We'll share the details of our next session soon. And thank you, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Thank you very much.